No.
Question is on the motion.
Stress can cause pregnancy
All in favor, say aye.
complications, jeopardizing the health of the mother and
All
the child.
opposed,
Health
no.
of the child.
The noes appear to have it. The noes do have it. Motion is not agreed to.
Necessary tax relief in this bill that goes to the richest people in our country. So my amendment is really simple. If you think people making $1 billion a year need and deserve a tax break, and also if you want to give a really good ad to these guys in November of 2026, vote no on the amendment and say that billionaires, not billionaires, people earning $1 billion need and deserve a tax break. I urge a yes vote. Mr. President,
Does the senator wish to call up his motion?
I have a motion to commit it to desk.
Clerk will report.
The senator from Maine, Mr. King, moves to commit the bill H.R. 1 to the
I ask
committee.
that further reading of the motion be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Mr. President, in truth, you could see this sort of upping of the ante. These are the gimmicks that we play when we want to get a show vote, especially with somebody who may be running for re-election. We know that this isn't going to materially change things. Now, my friend from Maine knows where I am on health care, and I hope that we get things fixed. But this exercise, by virtue of it being a voice vote, tells you all you need to know about this process. And for that reason, I would suggest just one more loud no vote.
Question is on the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. No. The noes appear to have it. The noes do have it. Motion is not agreed to.
Mr. President,
Senator from California.
I have a motion to commit at the desk.
Clerk will report.
The senator from California, Mr. Padilla, moves to commit the bill H.R. 1 to the Committee on Finance of the Senate.
I ask that further reading of the motion be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I know that you take great pleasure in criticizing the federal deficit under Democratic administrations. But the numbers don't lie. The biggest driver of the ballooning national debt has been Republican tax cuts for the wealthy and large corporations. And despite the parliamentary gymnastics that are being played here, our Republican colleagues know that this bill is adding an additional $3.5 trillion to the deficit over the next 10 years. Why else would they have included a piece of the bill to raise the debt limit by $5 trillion if this bill saved money as they claim? So if Republicans really do want to balance the budget or reduce the deficit, let's start by guaranteeing that this measure is at least deficit neutral. That's exactly what this amendment would do. I ask for your aye vote and reserve my time.
Senator from South Carolina.
Yes, CBO tells us if we adopt current policy for taxes, we will save $507 billion. The deficit will go down by $507 billion if we do this. In 2012, I was here. The Bush tax cuts were going to expire in December of 2012. President Obama sat down with Republicans, and they came up with a way to extend those tax cuts by not passing a new law. They called it the alternative fiscal scenario that CBO said is basically current policy. So alternative fiscal scenario in Latin means current policy. So we're doing what they did then. We're just doing it without any help from y'all, because y'all will never do anything to make sure taxes go down. So we're going to make sure they go down forever. Current policy is good tax policy. Stick with the bill we wrote. You're going to be happy to reduce the deficit and make sure people's taxes don't go up tomorrow, the next day, forever. Good policy. Current policy is good tax policy.
How much time
I'm
do I
done.
have left?
Senator's time has expired. Questions on the motion? Sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Banks.
That the Republican budget chairman is using to perform this multi-trillion-dollar magical act of making huge deficit-busting numbers disappear. It's called Section 312. It has been used before, but it has always been minor, corrective, and bipartisan. I mentioned earlier the adjustment that was made on a bipartisan basis to the Power Marketing Administration's numbers to return the CBO to an agreement that the Senate had previously made. That was not enormously consequential. This is almost certainly the first time you're hearing about it. Again, in 2023, as budget chair with Republican Chair Jody Arrington on the House side, we made a $105 million adjustment to a dairy program. Today we're talking about trillions. This was a $105 million adjustment. Again, bipartisan, minor, and corrective, fixing a technical issue on a bipartisan basis. Last year, Speaker Johnson and Leader Schumer agreed to direct CBO to score a fee program with an OMB estimate, and they used this rule again, collaborating on a bipartisan basis with a matter that was minor and corrective. Well, this is different. This is trillions. And Republicans are using this rule to pretend that it's not. Well, there are lots of ways to look at who's right. Time obviously will tell. But this bill actually has a tell right in it. Page 754 of this bill is the reality check on whether or not they're running up the debt by trillions. We know they're running up the debt by trillions because they say so in this bill. You can play Senate procedural fakery. You can wave magic wands around numbers all day long, but someday, soon, you hit reality. And you hit reality in the real world of markets and selling treasury bonds and having a legal debt limit. If this did not raise the debt by trillions, they would not need to raise the debt limit by trillions. Here is the text. Subtitle C, increase in debt limit. Section 72001, modification of limitation on the public debt. The limitation under Section 3101B of Title 31 is increased by $5 trillion. They're dodging the parliamentarians' ruling by letting the budget chair make a $1 trillion magic wand maneuver because they know pretty darn well what the parliamentarians' ruling would be. And how do they know what the parliamentarians' ruling would be? Because the answer's in their own damn bill. I yield the floor.
Would the senator from Rhode Island yield for a question?
Of course.
You mentioned the use of Section 312, which gives some flexibility to resolve, as you put it, minor issues on a bipartisan basis to correct an issue, a technical issue. In those cases you mentioned, were those on a reconciliation bill?
Were they on a reconciliation bill? I don't believe they were.
No, they were not.
They were
In fact, that power has never been used on a reconciliation bill because the following Section 313 gives very specific instructions. It says each provision must be costed out for its impact on both outlays, the spending side, or revenue, should it be a revenue measure. And if you're saying, well, how do I do that? You say, well, if we pass this provision, what will it cost? as compared to not passing this provision, not having the bill. That's a comparison to current law. This ability of the budget chair, and actually the law says the budget committee, to correct technical issues on narrow issues on a bipartisan basis, basically solve snarly little budgeting questions like on the dairy program you mentioned, never used on reconciliation ever, never used on a broad basis ever, never used to create a lie about what a bill costs in this fashion. Now we're turning to Senator from Maryland, who was ranking Democrat on the House Budget Committee for 6 years. So he brings a lot of experience and knowledge about the budget process. Senator Van Hollen.
Well, Mr. President, I thank my colleague and the ranking member of the Senate Budget Committee, Senator Merkley. I just want to start by reading a statement. This is a quote. Anyone that says current policy baseline is the right way to go is engaging in intellectual and economic fraud. It's intellectually lazy. My basic mission in life is just to try to create some honest math, unquote. That wasn't from Senator Van Hollen or anyone on this floor. This was from a Republican member of the House, Congressman Schweikert from Arizona, talking about exactly the issue we're debating here in the United States Senate. Let me read you another quote, a little more colorful. Again, about this Republican accounting fraud. Quote, this is fairy dust, and they're just full of crap, and I'm going to call them out on it. Republican Congressman Chip Roy of Texas. They're right. This is a fraud. This is a fraud that would make the Enron scammers blush. And I quote those House members for a reason, because we can disagree with what they did in their bill, and I strongly disagree with it. But at least they used honest math, and at least they used the math that is required by the rules here in the Senate. The honest math that Republicans here in the Senate want to dodge, because it will both tell the American people just how big the deficits are, but also because it will screw up their whole entire plan. Just so people listening have some sense of how these Senate numbers are designed to disguise the real impact of their deficits. Look at, for example, the basic individual tax rates in the House bill. When they extended those tax rates from the Trump 2017 bill, it costs $2.2 trillion. Under what we call the current law baseline, which is the reality baseline, because that's what it will cost when you understand that they sunset at the end of this year, and that's what it will cost to renew them. So under honest accounting, it's $2.2 trillion. Under the Senate fraudulent accounting, that $2.2 trillion deficit miraculously becomes an $83 billion deficit. Let's look at the House permanent extension of key deductions for businesses. That would cost honest accounting $821 billion. Under the Senate accounting scam, $6 billion. So what we're seeing here is this blatant, deliberate effort to mislead the American people about the true costs of this bill, about the deficit impacts of this bill, about how it will impact the debt. And we all know that when the debt goes up and we have to put more of our costs on Uncle Sam's credit card, it puts upward pressure on interest rates. That means Americans will pay higher interest rates on their mortgages, on their car loans, and everything else. So when you try to hide the deficit impact, you really are trying to fool the American people, and we're here to blow the whistle. Now, I just want to show our colleagues something that was put together by the Committee for a Responsible Budget. And if you look at the blue, you can see for each year, starting this year, 2025, 2006, the blue is what Senate Republicans claim their bill will add to the deficit. The red is how much more it will actually add to the deficit. So at the end of this 10-year period, what you see is Senate Republicans are claiming that their bill will add $441 billion, which is still a big number, but the real number when you do honest accounting, when you add up all of these, it's $4.2 trillion, a much bigger number. Now, I do want to point something out on this chart. I think everybody watching should understand it. If you look at these orange parts, these are the additional deficits from tax cuts. Starting here in year 2029, 2030, you'll see that they actually do start going down. Why is that? It's because the tax cut that President Trump promised for no tax on tips, they phased those out. This is all just a make-believe ruse. Yeah, we start providing no tax on tips, but those disappear. The tax breaks for wealthy people, they go on, and they go on not just for this 10-year period, but the reason they violate all the rules of reconciliation is because they keep going on after that. And as Senator Merkley said, if you look at the entire history of the Byrd rule, that's Senator Byrd, it was designed to make sure that 51 senators through a vote could not make these kind of permanent changes in any area, but specifically they were worried about areas that increased the national deficit and debt. So what Republican senators are doing is not only misleading the American people, but they're violating the entire structure that carved out this special procedure that we call reconciliation for the budget, which was intended to lower deficits and debts, not have them go on forever. As Senator Merkley has pointed out, I think if you look over a 30-year period, we're talking about $35 trillion plus additional to the debt. And Republicans want to hide that from the American people. That is budget fraud, pure and simple, and it is a violation of the rules of the United States Senate. This whole special structure that was created not to blow bigger holes in the debt and deficits, but to actually try to constrain them. So shame on everybody who's part of this fraud on the American people. I yield back my time.
Would the senator from Maryland yield for a question?
I will.
I found it very interesting that you pointed out that these tax provisions for the middle class, no tax on tips, is phased out, and no tax on overtime is phased out. And what you're saying, I believe, is that when they put into this bill that a tax break is ending, they're saying that it doesn't cost any more in the following years.
So they are certainly saying that their current policy baseline that they want us to make believe about would say that this wouldn't cost them. In other words, if they extended this, it wouldn't cost anything. It is interesting to note, not only does that expose the fraud behind the current policy baseline, but they made a very deliberate choice. Even though they now say that they can make these tax cuts permanent and still comply with the rules, they decided to make the tax cuts for very rich people permanent. But even though they say it's not going to cost anything anymore to provide, tax cuts with no tax on tips, they're phasing those out. And there are all of these areas are where President Trump made promises that he was going to take care of some working people. Well, man, those go away fast. Tax cuts for the rich, they go on for not just the full 10 years, but they keep going, which is why this is a violation of the entire reconciliation process.
So I find two things very interesting. They're saying if something was in the law that they passed in 2017 and it expires, they're pretending it doesn't expire and therefore extending doesn't cost anything. But in their own bill, when they say a provision expires, they're saying, no, it really does die and therefore we're saving money in the years after. How is those two things possibly consistent?
Well, clearly they're not. I mean, this is literally magical thinking. This is why Republican Congressman Schweithart called this, or Chip Roy called this fairy dust, and why the congressman from Arizona said this was pure intellectual and economic fraud. That's what it is. That's the bottom line.
Well, I really thank the senator from Maryland also pointing out that President Trump, he did, when he was campaigning, say he was fighting for ordinary families. But at his inauguration, who did he have standing behind him? Not champions for health care or champions for housing, certainly not champions for nutrition or education, but in fact a series of like 5 or 6 billionaires. And now you're telling me that in this bill, and I want to make sure the American people understand this, the provisions that were sweeteners to say we were helping working people are being phased out, but they're keeping all the tax breaks for billionaires.
Well, you're right. You know, it was right down this hall, actually, that President Trump was sworn in, and he said it was going to be a new golden age for working people. Well, as you're pointing out, and this chart clearly shows, and their own budget reveals, it's clearly a golden age for billionaires and people who make a lot of money. And in this bill, they make sure that that golden age for very rich people goes on forever. They had a few little crumbs that they were throwing for a little while, we can see, to others, but just for a little while and just small amounts compared to the golden age for the billionaires.
Well, I must say my impression is, and I hope you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is that the Republicans are embarrassed by the fact that they're proposing a bill that creates over $3 trillion in debt in 10 years and over $30 trillion over 30 years, and that the vast bulk of it goes to billionaires. And so they want to say, we're so embarrassed because we mentioned fiscal responsibility when we were running for office. We're going to get the budget under control, and they're doing the opposite. And they're embarrassed that they're doing these cuts in programs to fund tax breaks for billionaires, cutting regular health care, 16 million people losing health care for tax breaks for billionaires that, as you point out, go on and on and on, actually permanent. I would certainly love to yield to my colleague from Rhode Island.
When I was budget chairman and we were trying to focus, for instance, on the impending economic nightmare coming our way through climate-caused property insurance failures, what I would get is nonstop regular lectures from Republicans on the Budget Committee about how we had to take responsibility for the deficit, we had to reduce the debt, nothing else mattered as much, it was absolutely vital. And now, of course, we see that at their very first shot, with the power to do anything through their majority and using reconciliation, they're raising the debt. They're raising the deficit, and not by little, but by trillions. And I'm wondering if in your time as chairman, or perhaps in Senator Murray's time on the committee, or perhaps in Senator Van Hollen's time over on the House committee, you were favored with such constant lecturing by Republicans about the debt and the deficit, and how credible that all seems right now.
I'll yield to Senator Murray.
I thank the senator for his question, because it's just stunning to me that the vast majority of debate, in fact, all the debate that came from Republicans at the time I was chair of the Budget Committee trying to put forward a smart budget for the United States of America, the only thing they talked about was debt and deficit. The only challenge they made to us was debt and deficit. The only time we tried to do anything for child care, for health care, they threw the debt at us. So it is pretty stunning to me that now that they need to raise the debt for giving tax breaks to the very rich people who stood behind the president at his inauguration, then they play with the numbers and pretend it's not real, and a trillion all of a sudden becomes zero, and I'm using some rule you've never heard of to try and pretend that this isn't real. It's fairy dust.
I just want to say, to answer the question from the senator from Rhode Island, pick up on what my colleagues have said, that when I was the senior Democrat, the ranking member on the House Budget Committee, Paul Ryan was the chairman of the committee. And look, we disagreed on many things. We agreed on many things. We both agreed that we should get our deficits and debt under control. We had different ideas on how to do it. He wanted to privatize Medicare. We wanted to close tax breaks for the rich. But we wanted to close tax breaks for the rich. But the reality is that the holy grail, I mean, the only guiding North Star for Republicans at that time was we've got to bring down deficits and debt. This is not that Republican Party, not in any way, shape, or form. They clearly don't give a damn. In fact, they are worried, as we can see, that the American people still care, which is why they want to engage in this fraudulent scheme. But I'll just close on this. I remember one of those years, I believe it was the 2012 Republican convention. They even put up a debt clock. They put up a debt clock at the convention. I can't find it. Right? I'm looking under my desk for the debt clock here because Republicans seem to have hidden it away forever. They want to wish it away. That's what they're telling us.
But the bill actually is required to raise the debt limit by $5 trillion. So in reality, there's a huge hit to our debt, huge additions to our deficit, and it makes me a little bit frustrated to think back to all those lectures that I had to receive as budget chairman, which the senator from Maryland witnessed as a longtime member of the Senate Budget Committee, which the ranking member witnessed in his time on the Budget Committee, and which Senator Murray experienced when she chaired the Budget Committee. We have been lectured to death by our colleagues, and at the very first instance when they had the power to do something about it, they went 180 the other direction and are cranking the national debt in order to give big benefits to the rich people who fund their campaigns.
For a question, and I know we need to move on here. I just want to add one thing. It's not just that it's going to be debt. It's the cost to families because this debt they are putting in place. I would ask the chair of the Budget Committee now.
Mr. President.
Senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a motion to commit at the desk.
Clerk will report.
The senator from Colorado, Mr. Bennett, moves to commit the bill H.R. 1 to the Committee on Finance of the Senate with instructions to report the same back to the
I ask the further reading of the motion be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. The legislation we're debating today would modestly increase the size of the child tax credit while leaving out more than 17 million children from the full credit. America's poorest children, whose families are struggling to make ends meet, receive nothing from this bill. Everywhere I go in Colorado, I meet parents who are working hard, often 2 and 3 jobs, just to keep their families' heads above water. Like Americans all across this country, Mr. President, they are wrestling with the legacy of 50 years of trickle-down economics that have benefited the wealthiest Americans while leaving working and middle-class families behind, which this bill does again. Today, the United States boasts one of the highest childhood poverty rates in the industrialized world. This is a moral disgrace, but we know how to end childhood poverty in this country. In 2021, we expanded the child tax credit and our childhood poverty. We cut it nearly in half and hunger by a quarter.
The senator's time's expired.
Thank you, Mr. President. We should refuse to pass a bill that adds millions to our debt in order to cut taxes for the wealthiest while doing nothing for our kids. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment to the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Idaho.
Mr. President, the Democrats contend that they want to increase and expand the child tax credit and ensure that big corporations and ultra-wealthy pay their fair share. Despite the rhetoric behind these claims, I remind my colleagues that Republicans created the child tax credit, expanded its availability, and doubled the amount of the credit in the TCJA, which we are working on tonight. This bill not only makes that doubled child tax credit permanent, but also increases it, providing significant relief for families. In addition, as a result of the TCJA cutting taxes for overwhelmingly the majority of Americans, with the middle class receiving the largest proportional benefit of these cuts, Republicans made the tax code more progressive, not less. The legislation before us makes those tax provisions permanent. Americans deserve more than empty platitudes. They deserve meaningful tax relief and real results.
The question is on the motion.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks. Ms. Baldwin. Thank you. Mr. Banks. McCormick. Britt. Curtis. I got you.
Over time, that in fact they were concerned about the deficit. They were concerned about American families. Because if you are concerned about the deficit and debt, if you are concerned about families, you must vote no on this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, I really want to thank my colleagues. I mean, you just said they used to call themselves deficit hawks. We need to call them deficit robins. They're robbing from you to pay for the billionaires. They are no longer deficit hawks. Agree? Thank you.
My colleagues, and I think as Senator Merkley said, if you care about deficit and debt and you don't want working families to have to pay for these tax cuts for billionaires and the rich, vote no on the bill.
I'd only add in my last words, watch. Everybody here, watch as this goes forward, because we will give the Republicans a chance to reduce the increase to the debt and the deficit by peeling back just the tax cuts for the greedy billionaires. We would be voting for working class tax cuts, I'm almost certain. We'll have a chance to bring into stark focus through our amendments what really matters to the folks on the other side of the aisle, and that is the tax cuts for the super wealthy, for the billionaires, for the corporations that are offshoring jobs, and for the biggest polluters in the country. That's where their sweet spot is, and we will expose that through these votes.
Those votes, we're not sure when they will start, because the Republicans are redrafting provisions of this bill right now. That's how little time this Senate will have to actually know what's in this 1,000-page bill with all kinds of special deals tucked into it for various members. We will have little time to see because they're still writing it. So those amendments that my colleague from Rhode Island mentioned, stay tuned. We're not sure if those amendments are going to start at 2 in the morning or if they'll start sometime later tomorrow, but stay tuned and pay attention, because you're going to find out who stands with families and who stands to hurt families in favor of helping billionaires. Thank you.
Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, thank you. I think it's really important, the discussion we had right now about the deficit and debt, but I want to talk a little bit more about this bill in general. You know, recent KFF polling shows that this Republican big, ugly betrayal bill is overwhelmingly unpopular. In fact, this thing is more underwater than the Titanic. Nearly 2 in 3 Americans view this bill unfavorably. That goes up to nearly 3 in 4 when they learn it will kick millions off their health insurance. And it goes up to nearly 4 in 5 when they learn it will choke off funding to their local hospital. In other words, the more the American people hear about what is actually in this big, ugly betrayal bill, the more they dislike it. So with that in mind, I want to be here today to say a little bit more about what is in the Republicans' latest version. Spoiler alert, it is still big. It is still ugly, and it is an absolute betrayal of the people who sent us here to fight for them. The Republican plan is still going to mean over 16 million people losing health care as patients get kicked off their ACA plans. Kids and struggling families will get kicked off Medicaid. Rural hospitals are going to be forced to shut their doors. The Republican plan is still going to mean more starving families. New red tape is going to cut people off from their SNAP benefits that they need to put food on the table. And it is going to take away kids' school meals. The Republican plan still rips away support from the people in this country who are struggling the most to give away billions in tax breaks to billionaires who need help the least. In short, this latest version of Republicans' bill would still be one of the biggest transfers of wealth from the people at the bottom to the people at the top in our nation's history. When it comes to health care, this Republican abomination will cause millions of people to lose their insurance and see their costs skyrocket in one way or another. It will create mountains of new paperwork and bureaucratic barriers that are positively meant to kick people off their Medicaid and ACA coverage. And there is new sabotage to the ACA healthcare markets, which will mean more people losing their affordable coverage. Meanwhile, there is nothing, a big fat zero, when it comes to renewing the tax credits Democrats passed to lower your healthcare costs. That's right. While Republicans are showering their billionaire donors in new tax breaks, they will not lift a finger to extend healthcare tax credits that are saving millions of families thousands of dollars a year on health coverage. Instead, they're going to make sure people lose health care coverage, including our seniors, people with disabilities, pregnant women, millions of patients who rely on Medicaid. And let's not forget, the cuts in their bill are going to shutter hospitals across the country, especially in our rural areas. Do you have Medicaid, Medicare, employer-sponsored coverage? Regardless, Republicans have some pretty bad news for you, because it hardly matters what insurance you're on when you don't have a hospital to get care anymore. In Washington State, we have 14 rural hospitals that are fighting to survive and would likely close under this bill, mostly in areas represented by Republicans, I should add. Not to mention, we have 6 rural labor and delivery units that could be forced to close their doors under this bill. And you know what the Senate Republicans did? They made that problem worse. They put even more pressure on our rural hospitals. I'm telling you, this betrayal is getting bigger and uglier by the day. And this cannot get lost. Republicans want to shut the doors of one of the biggest healthcare providers in the country. They want to defund Planned Parenthood. That is wildly harmful and wildly unpopular. It would shutter at least 200 health centers that provide a wide spectrum of care, including cancer screenings, pap smears, birth control for millions of women. And let's not forget, Republicans are cutting nutrition assistance too. This big, ugly betrayal would make one of the biggest cuts to SNAP in history. We are talking around a $200 billion cut over the next 10 years. Now, it should be obvious, but that would be devastating for our country and for our kids' future. And yet, Republicans are not giving up on taking dinner off the table, taking school lunch off kids' trays, all so they can shovel tax cuts at billionaires and wealthy corporations. And it is worth underscoring the new red tape in their bill is even targeted at some of our most vulnerable families, because it expands work requirements to apply to seniors and parents with kids in school. Mr. President, when my dad, World War II veteran, got sick with multiple sclerosis, He lost his job. He lost his job. My mom was at home, 7 kids she was raising. My dad lost his job, and they had to spend, my mom had to spend some time getting some new skills so she could go back to work and take care of our family. You know what, during that time? We had to rely on food stamps in my family to feed those 7 kids in my family. But under this Republican bill today, because neither of my parents had a job during those few months, my family would not be eligible for SNAP benefits. We would not have even gotten food on our table at the worst time in my family's life. This is wrong. Thanks to those food stamps, my family did get through that rough patch, and all 7 of us kids grew up to give back to our communities. Whether it's a firefighter or a middle school teacher, or even here as a United States Senator. So I can't emphasize enough. Republicans want to cut families from SNAP and Medicaid, programs that give people a hand up in hard times. Why? So they can give an enormous handout to the richest people and biggest companies in our country. Oh, and at the same time, they're making it harder to afford groceries and health care. I should mention, they are also gutting energy investments in a completely chaotic way that is all but guaranteed to drive away jobs and drive up energy costs for all of American families. And at the same time, in this bill, they're giving billionaires billions of dollars. Republicans are going to give students the short end of the stick. This big mess of a bill would tear away programs and protections that make it possible for many students to pursue a higher education. It eliminates Grad Plus loans. It cuts families off from Parent Plus loans. It punishes students who go into public service or a medical residency, and more. Meanwhile, they are tearing down the guardrails from gutting regulations that protect students whose universities commit fraud, to opening a Pandora's box for Pell Grants with a new loophole that will let low-quality programs suck up our taxpayer dollars. These changes are especially going to hurt students from low-income families and first-generation college students and our veterans. Some of them will have no way to go to college when Republicans take their support away. Some will be driven into predatory private loans they can't afford. And some will get lured into low-quality programs that take their money, waste taxpayer dollars, and leave the student worse off. And if that wasn't enough, if the Secretary of Education wanted to try and stop this kind of fraud and protect students, Republicans will leave them about as much authority as a school hall monitor, because in this bill, Republicans prevent any Secretary of Education from making regulations that carry added benefits for borrowers. And it hardly matters if that is a good impact, like saving students money or protecting taxpayer dollars from fraud or making higher education more accessible. Republicans are going to make problems worse and make fixing them even harder. Students in this country should be outraged. And I want to be perfectly clear about something. If Republicans charge ahead with this big, awful mess, which they seem intent on doing, they can kiss any last shred of credibility goodbye, as we just talked about, when it comes to pretending they care about balancing the budget or addressing the national debt. The idea was already laughable. For the entirety of the 21st century, the biggest driver of the national debt has been tax cuts that Republicans championed. But now, as we just talked about, they want to put at least $4 trillion, that is trillions with a T, on the national credit card. Why? So they can shower the richest people on the planet with more money. And then they're pretending all the math works and it's kind of easy peasy if they can do it if they kick people off health care or take enough meals away from kids or close enough hospitals, or better still, use some absurd accounting gimmick to pretend that billions of dollars in new tax cuts for their billionaire donors actually just don't cost anything. Well, I've got some bad news for Republicans. Your math is terrible. and so's this bill. This thing is very expensive, and you don't have to take my word for it. Ask the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, which just said the latest version of this bill will add 4 trillion, T-trillion, to the debt with just over the next 10 years. If Republicans want to ignore them, you can also ask the fiscal hawks at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. They calculate that the House bill adds $5 trillion to our debt when you include interest payments and the cost of making temporary provisions in this bill permanent. And we are told the Senate bill is even less fiscally responsible. Everyone agrees this thing is not beautiful, but it is recklessly big, and it won't just increase the debt, it will blow it up. Mr. President, this may very well be the most expensive bill in history. I say may because Republicans are still planning changes. We have not yet gotten the final bill. They already cut out even more taxes for multinational corporations. SNAP benefits, they're still on the chopping block. Healthcare, still on the chopping block. In fact, they want to cut Medicaid even more painfully. We may not know how expensive the Republicans will be in the end, but we know who is paying for it. Paying for it is you, working families. And it is important for people to know, as bad as this bill is, Republicans were trying to make it even worse. Now, Democrats have been fighting them every step of the way, and we have notched a few important wins by challenging every single provision we possibly could under the Senate rules. So I want to talk about some of the things Democrats were successful in getting out. Because if Republicans had had their way, not only would this bill take away more food from our struggling families or shutter even more hospitals and kick even more people off their health insurance, it would have also sold off all of our public lands. And if instead of just slashing CFPB funding, it would have completely shuttered the doors of a very important federal watchdog that protects Americans from getting scammed. If Republicans had have had their way, this bill would make it easier to buy gun silencers, harder to get your earned income tax credit or pay off your student loan, and effectively impossible to get insurance plans on the marketplace that cover abortion care. If Republicans had had their way, this bill would have also given Trump more power to deny funding to our constituents on a whim and less power for the courts to stop him. We're talking about a whole smorgasbord of really awful, unpopular ideas and policies that would have hurt our families and weakened our democracy. Ideas that were this close to making it into this bill. But Republicans did not have their way. Democrats have been fighting back at every single step. We got those provisions tossed in the shredder, and we are still doing our darndest to send the rest of the bill to the shredder as well. Now, let's be clear. When we talk about how unpopular this bill is with the American people, the reason is simple. This bill polls like garbage because it is garbage. That's why it should go nowhere except a trash bin. Democrats are going to keep pushing back on this monstrosity with absolutely everything we've got at every step we can. We're not going to stand by as Republicans shutter hospitals so the richest people in the country can build another vacation home. We are not going to sit around and let Republicans kick millions of people off of their insurance and raise working families' premiums so corporate executives can get a bigger bonus. And we are not going to be silent as Republicans take food away from struggling families so they can help billionaires fuel up their private jets. We're going to keep speaking up, we're going to keep pushing back, and we're going to make sure everyone knows exactly what is going on here. This bill is deeply unpopular, that much is clear, but if Republicans keep pushing for this disaster, buckle up, because we are only going to keep getting louder and louder about how big this is, how ugly it is, and it's only going to get more unpopular with the folks back home as these provisions are enacted if this bill passes. I'm pretty astounded by how far some Republicans are trying to stick their heads in the sand on this. One Republican senator told their concerned constituents, and I quote, "We're all going to die." Well, maybe that's a better name for the bill. At least it's more honest. Because when you take health care away from people, when you make it harder to get, when you make it harder to afford, when you close the only hospital for miles, yeah, you're right, people will die. You'd think my colleagues would show a bit more concern about that. Instead, that senator actually doubled down, and in a response video, she filmed walking through a cemetery. I don't know how you get out of touch that much to misunderstand this, but let me be clear about something to our Republicans. Whistling past the graveyard is a metaphor to stop ignoring dangers. It is not a literal messaging suggestion. And if you thought Republicans couldn't be any more dismissive to their own constituents, this week another Republican senator who was speaking about people voicing their concerns about these Medicaid cuts that said they will, quote, "people will get over it." Mr. President, I have news for every one of my Republican colleagues who is trying to deny the reality of this bill and pretend the fairy tales they are telling themselves are true. When someone's local hospital closes, they don't get over it. When someone's kid is kicked off health care, they do not get over it. And if Republicans don't want to take my word for it, they can listen to the doctor I spoke with who warned when patients go uninsured, they delay care and it increases costs for everyone. Instead of paying $10 for diabetic medication, we'll pay $10,000 for an amputation. Or Republicans can actually read the countless letters I'm getting from my constituents, sharing their stories. Quote,
on this vote, the yeas are 47, the nays are 53, and the motion is not agreed to.
President.
Senator from Maine.
Mr. President, may I have order, please?
We have order in the chamber.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I call up amendment number 2812 and ask that it be reported by number.
The clerk will report.
Senator from Maine, Ms. Collins, President, an amendment number 2812 to amendment number 2360.
Mr. President, my amendment would increase funding for the Rural Healthcare Provider Fund to $50 billion and expand the list of eligible providers to include not only rural hospitals, but also community health centers, nursing homes, ambulance services, skilled nursing facilities, and others. Rural providers, especially our rural hospitals and nursing homes, are under great financial strain right now, with many having recently closed and others being at risk of closing. Mr. President, when these facilities close their doors, the people they serve are often left behind without access to health care. This amendment would help keep them open and caring for those who live in these rural communities. The additional funding is fully offset through a modest increase in the top marginal tax rate, equal to the pre-2017 rate for individuals with income above $25 million and married couples with income above $50 million. I urge support for this amendment to provide the additional funding for rural and Medicaid providers who desperately need it.
President.
Senator from Oregon.
Mr. President and colleagues, here is how flawed this plan is. The danger Senate Republicans are causing for rural hospitals is so great, Republicans have had to create a rural hospital relief fund so they can look like they are fixing the problem they are causing. It is a Band-Aid on an amputation, It provides just a tiny fraction of the nearly $1 trillion in cuts the bill makes to Medicaid. It would be much more logical to simply not cut $1 trillion from Medicaid in the first place. This amendment doubles down on that flawed plan that's going to set rural hospitals adrift. I urge opposition to the amendment, and I yield back. Mr. President, I make a point of order that the pending measure violates Section 302F of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974.
Senator from Maine.
President, pursuant to Section 904 of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974, I move to waive, and I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsor-Brooks. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Banks. Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt-Rochester, Mr. Booker.
Millions of dollars in new tax cuts for extraordinarily wealthy oil and gas companies, and $40 million for a Garden of Heroes, a sculptured garden to honor President Trump's favorite historical personalities. And at the same time, it slashes the budget for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which makes sure that shady payday lenders, mortgage lenders, and banks don't fleece American families. And in particular, the military division of the CFPB protects men and women in the uniform of the United States. We were able to pass an interest cap of 36% for active duty personnel. And that is going to be ignored because there's no one to enforce it. And we are going to see, as we have in the past, our soldiers, sailors, airmen, guardians exploited, systematically exploited by all those little automobile shops and payday lenders and everything else that surrounds every military fort base in this country. It's a tale as old as time. My Republican colleagues showering the rich with tax benefits and prioritizing favored industries and friends. President Bush joined with the Republican Congress to do that. Of course, I opposed it. And well, by the way, when President Bush did that, we were projected to have, over the next 10 years, a multi-trillion-dollar surplus. Of course, this legislation will lead us to a multi-trillion-dollar deficit. And it's interesting because when I was younger, the Republicans all associated themselves with fiscal responsibility, balanced budgets, surpluses. That's not the case. President Trump exacerbated the situation in his first term by his grand giveaway. But this time, President Trump and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are depriving millions of Americans of their health care coverage to pay for it. They are intent on punishing the most vulnerable Americans in this bill simply for the crime of being poor. In fact, in many cases, despite working very long hours and being poor. I came here to Congress, to the Senate, after serving my country in the U.S. Army, as the President did with great distinction in the United States Navy as a Navy SEAL. I came here to serve my constituents and improve the lives of average Americans. And I think most of my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans alike, came with the same goal. And according to press reports, a few of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are starting to realize that this bill is going to do great damage to their constituents. One Republican colleague has warned that this bill could leave 600,000 of his constituents without health care coverage and blow a $38 billion hole in his state's budget. That would be a devastating effect. One of the other aspects of this attack on our health care system is there's some people that believe, well, Medicaid doesn't touch me. It certainly does. Because when you extract that much money from the health care system, what will private health insurance do? They'll raise their rates. Everyone will be paying more. And some won't be able to afford it. They'll have to go without coverage. And that is going to be a tragedy for this country. Now, knowing the damage this bill is going to do, one must ask, why would anyone support this? But this legislation is more than just numbers. I've heard from countless Rhode Islanders who are concerned about these cuts during meetings, in letters, when I bump into them at the grocery store or the pharmacy. They've been telling me about how Medicaid has helped them and their families. I've been meeting, for example, with Christina from Smithfield, Rhode Island, for many years. Her daughter, Lauren, was born with cystic fibrosis and has endured countless hospitalizations, procedures, medications, and other challenges as she navigates life with this disease. Christina, Lauren, and their family have private insurance, but Medicaid also helps cover the expenses not covered by private insurance for people with serious illnesses who are not able to work. When President Trump and congressional Republicans began proposing these cuts to Medicaid, Christina told me, and I quote, "Lauren was born with CF, a rare genetic progressive disease which affects her lungs, GI, and endocrine systems. I had no idea we carried this gene. When Lauren was born, she spent a month in the hospital. We almost lost her. When she was 5, she contracted a germ that put her in the hospital for a month and almost killed her. Her lung function fell to 70%. At 13, I thought she was going to die. Her hospital stays were every 3 months for 2 weeks with IV treatments. Her lung function fell to 30%. With one of the medicines for CF, she was able to finally get her lung function back to 65% at 23 years old. She still suffers every day. Just trying to breathe is difficult. If she catches the common cold, it could put her in the hospital. She has had a hard time keeping weight on, and her GI is a disaster. She spent hours in the bathroom. She developed CF-related diabetes, which always puts her in danger. Every day is rigorous treatments and medications just to stay alive. It is with the help of the NIH and the FDA that she is still alive. Please do not make these cuts. If Medicaid is cut, when she is 26, 2 years from now, she will have no way to pay for all of her hospitalizations, medications, and treatments. Few could afford to keep her alive. It is this simple. Without Medicaid, she will die. We need your help. Carolina from Central Falls, Rhode Island, shared similar concerns for her daughter. My daughter has special needs, and we rely on Medicaid for her needs. Not having Medicaid would create a sinkhole for us. People with profound autism need lifetime, 24/7 care. As you consider budget cuts, it is important to me as your constituent that you work to ensure that this vulnerable population has access to the critical supports that it needs to survive. I will be looking to you for your courage and leadership. Indeed, and now we're looking across the aisle for courage and leadership to reject this flawed bill. I received an email from one constituent, Wally, in Cranston, Rhode Island. She is a 71-year-old retiree on Medicare. Her husband is 72 with Alzheimer's disease, living in a nursing home under hospice care and relying on Medicaid for his health care. She wrote to me that she was, quote, terrified at all the cuts to programs and services that she and her husband so desperately rely on. Without Medicaid, she wonders if she or her husband would be able to continue receiving care. I also heard from Diane in Coventry, Rhode Island, whose daughter gets life-saving care through Medicaid. Diane said, Medicaid is important to me personally. Medicaid matters to me and my family. My 15-year-old daughter suffered a brain bleed and a stroke at the age of 5. It came out of nowhere and was very unexpected. She has spent a lot of time in the hospital, rehabilitation services, doctor's offices, appointments, etc. over the past almost 10 years. Medicaid allows her to be home and taken care of on a daily basis. Without Medicaid, she would not be able to receive hospital-level care at home. She wouldn't have a wheelchair or any other durable medical equipment. She wouldn't be able to get her life-saving medications or the nourishment she needs through her G-tube. Please, I urge you to save Medicaid, not only for my family, but for millions of others. All of our lives depend on it. Now, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle may say, we're not going to cut these people's Medicaid. We're just going after the fraudsters, the freeloaders who aren't working. Now, who exactly are these fraudsters and freeloaders? Is it the elderly patient who needs expensive nursing home care? Is it the child with a serious chronic health condition? Should we cut off these people's access to health care because they can't work? They physically cannot work? Or because the constant paperwork requirements got lost in the shuffle? Let's be clear. If my colleagues were serious about eliminating fraud, they would be providing states with more resources to investigate questionable claims and bad actors. Medicaid coverage is not extravagant, it is a lifeline. If my colleagues were sincere in their claim that these cuts are about protecting the program, quote, for the people who need it the most, as the majority leader has claimed, then they would be investing the so-called savings back into Medicaid instead of blowing it on tax cuts for the well-off. Instead, this bill is cutting funding to states for Medicaid, and states will have no choice but to pick and choose who will get access to care. But don't take my word for it. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, CBO, estimates that this bill will cause nearly 17 million Americans to lose their health insurance. 17 million people. That's not fraud. It's just making it harder for people to get health care. On top of that, even if you're one of the lucky ones who gets to keep your Medicaid, will you still be able to get it? Nursing homes rely on Medicaid. More than 6 in 10 nursing home residents in Rhode Island are on Medicaid. As Medicaid funding is cut, what will nursing homes do? I imagine some will have to close their doors or dramatically reduce the number of beds. So you could be one of these fairly well-to-do Rhode Islanders trying to get mom in the Medicaid home, the nursing home, I should say, and you're willing to pay, but if it's closed, or there's only 5 beds where there used to be 20, she's going to be where, in my generation, grandparents were, in the living room, in a hospital bed, being cared for, in those days, typically by your mother. So this approach to Medicaid is going to touch every aspect of American life. And the same can be said about the community health care centers. Medicaid makes up a huge portion of the operating budget for community health centers, which provide primary, dental, and behavioral care to more than 200,000 Rhode Islanders. That's roughly 1 in 5 Rhode Islanders. It's hard enough to find a doctor now. It will only get harder if a community health center closes its doors and thousands of patients don't have a doctor anymore. And where do all those patients end up when they can't get routine care? The emergency room. That means there will be lines out the door, and if you have a serious health event and need to get in, you better get used to waiting a long time. This is not how a health system is supposed to run. And in Rhode Island, our health system is already on the brink. People are just getting by. People are waiting in the hallways of ERs for a bed upstairs. People are spending days on the phone trying to find a doctor. We should be making these things better, not worse. But again, Republicans' main priority seems not the physical or financial health of everyday Americans. It is providing massive tax cuts to President Trump's billionaire and millionaire friends. There's certainly nothing wrong with being successful, and there's nothing wrong with wealth. That's something that has been part of the American dream since our beginning. But what it requires is opportunity. And one of the fundamental opportunities it requires is good health and good education. And what this bill will do is destroy our health care system and force the states to make dramatic cuts to the education system. We are shutting down opportunity in America while we enrich the wealthy elite. The American dream, as I believe it, is about the middle class and a government that's focused on them, not taking $1 trillion from Medicaid so Republicans can gift to those who've already benefited from many other gifts. Mr. President, let's put the enormity of this transfer to the wealthiest in perspective. There are about 128 million households in America. Yet somehow this bill gives the top 0.1% of households a $250,000 tax cut, a giveaway that's over 3 times larger than what the median American household makes in a year. When confronted with this point, Republicans consistently try to hide the ball. Middle and working class Americans are getting tax cuts too, they say. Who cares if the rich gets richer? Well, the Senate bill raises taxes on the lowest income Americans, the same families from whom Republicans are ripping away health care and other benefits. While we are voting on this bill without a full analysis of its impact on households, the Congressional Budget Office found that the House-passed version would take around $1,600 away from these lowest income households each year after accounting for tax changes and benefit cuts. And it's not just low-income Americans. Researchers at Penn's Wharton School of Business have found that most Americans lose money under the House bill in future years, too. I want to be crystal clear. We need to reform our tax care system. We need to make it fairer for working Americans, not just for the ultra-wealthy. We hear from people so often that government is broken. They're right. Our tax system is unfair and needs reform. But giving the top 0.1% of Americans an extra $250,000 every year is not fixing the government. It's just adding to the sense of unfairness and brokenness that so many citizens feel. We can do a bipartisan tax bill that is both fully paid for and that helps average Americans. In fact, we almost did that last summer when the House passed a tax bill 357 to 70 that would have extended the child tax credit and reinstated tax cuts for businesses without increasing the deficit. 48 bipartisan senators voted for that bill in this very chamber, but it was blocked because Republican leaders wanted to pass something like this bill before us today. My Republican colleagues have drafted a bill that is neither paid for nor helps most Americans. Worst of all, they have chosen to take from the poor and the middle class and the working class to give to billionaires. This bill is very bad policy. It's almost un-American if you believe that the essence of America, as expressed by one of our greatest presidents, Abraham Lincoln, was to give every person a fair chance in the race of life. This bill denies that chance to millions and millions of Americans while enhancing and filling the pockets of the wealthiest. And I oppose it. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Good.
Thank you. I'm honored to follow my colleague, Senator Reid, and he is absolutely right that this bill is almost un-American. In fact, I would say it is un-American because it is so destructive to the middle class, to health care, to education, to basic fairness and decency in our great country, the greatest country in the history of the world. It would balloon the debt and the deficit by $4 trillion, and yet my Republican colleagues have sought to disguise and hide that reprehensible pain and damage to the American system. It would cut Medicaid by $930 billion, which means billions in cuts for Connecticut, hundreds of thousands of Connecticut children and families off Medicaid, food nutrition shredded, and student loans decimated. These kinds of impacts on Connecticut are mirrored through the whole country. And the American people are beginning to get it. That's why this bill, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, is so deeply unpopular, in fact, by 2-to-1 majority. And I want to talk not only about Connecticut, but two of the states that are represented by colleagues here. They are so-called red states. But make no mistake, this bill is seismically catastrophic, not just for Connecticut, but for the whole country and for Louisiana, where this measure, if it's passed, will mean that my colleagues from Louisiana are voting to kick roughly 250,000 people in their state off health insurance. They will be voting for a bill that could close 33 rural hospitals in their state alone and cost their state's health care providers $588 million for services that newly insured patients simply will not be able to pay back. Their state program would lose $4 billion. That's Louisiana alone in funding. These numbers are staggering, and they're the reason that every major health system in Louisiana is opposing this bill. Just yesterday, they sent a letter warning that cuts in this bill, and I'm quoting the Louisiana healthcare providers here, quote, would be historic in their devastation and warrant our shared advocacy to protect our patients and the care we provide them in hospitals and clinics. I could go on about Louisiana. I'm going to abbreviate my remarks and put my full statement in the record if there's no objection, Mr. President.
Without objection.
But this bill also reduces SNAP benefits for 206,000 Louisianans. It eliminates the benefit entirely for 94,000 of them. I want to see my colleagues from Louisiana go home and face their constituents, having cut the legs from SNAP and Medicaid programs and many other benefits. And in Utah, same tragic scenario unfolding in a state where 337,000 children and adults depend on Medicaid. Nearly half of all children in Utah are covered by Medicaid. 59% of nursing home residents. 60,000 people living in rural Utah communities covered by Medicaid. If this bill passes, at least 180,000 Utahns will lose health care coverage, and Utah's uninsured rate will increase by a staggering 67%. If this bill passes, 31,000 of the people in Utah could see their benefits slashed, and 13,000 would risk losing their benefits entirely. Now, I just want to say in conclusion, these numbers for Connecticut, for Louisiana, for Utah, for the state of Washington, where my wonderful colleague, Senator Cantwell, will be talking shortly, they're not just numbers. They are faces. They are lives. They're children who are just beginning to be Americans. And their productivity, their contributions back to America will be hamstrung. Their lives will be financially handicapped, and health-wise, they will be impaired as a result of these irresponsible and reprehensible cuts. I couldn't be angrier about these kinds of cuts in programs done only so that the ultra-wealthy will receive tax cuts. I'm willing to bet that a lot of those billionaires and millionaires would forego those tax benefits if they understood the consequences. But my Republican colleagues, who are in disarray at this moment, they can't come together on a program because they know how abhorrent its effects would be on their states, ought to listen to the people of America, not the ultra-wealthy. And the people are speaking in the polls. They're speaking through their elected representatives, and they are speaking because their conscience simply won't let them support a bill that does such abhorrent damage to the American middle class, the American way of life, American values. And I'm proud to stand here. I wish we weren't here going all night into Monday morning, but I'm proud to stand here with my colleagues, and I just wish my Republican colleagues were on the same sides of these issues, because they're going to go home and they'll have to face the children and families who will be hurt so deeply by this bill. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, I rise to ask my colleagues to turn down this legislation in front of us, to reject it, and instead work together on fiscal policy that would help us by growing our economy more successfully and not devastating our constituents. Before I start, I want to thank the presiding officer for speaking up about not selling public lands. I very much appreciate his voice in that debate, and it's critical that we were able to successfully get that out of this legislation. I want to work across the aisle to talk about these policies so that we can move our country forward in a competitive fashion. But I'm afraid that what we have in front of us is not the answer to what will make America competitive, particularly at a time when we are putting tariffs on American imported products, when we are basically getting into a trade war, and when we are devastating what I think is the underpinning of the economy of today, that is an information age, innovation economy, and here we are devastating all of our investments in NIH and NSF and in the competitiveness that we just implemented in the IRA and the CHIPS and Science Act that is making us the envy of countries around the world for innovation. We do have great capital markets, and those capital markets help us innovate. And I think some of my colleagues think, well, we have a promise to families here to give them a tax break, and while many of us would support that, you're asking us also to give tax breaks to big corporations before they can get their tax break. And that we don't like. We don't like it because it raises the cost on everybody, and that cost for middle class and lower income people will be devastating, particularly at a time when we continue with this tariff policy. This bill would make the entire healthcare system less responsive and more expensive for everyone by dismantling Medicaid and shifting more of the cost burden onto states and threatening the very existence of rural hospital. This bill also sells spectrum out from under our national defense and safety agencies and forces states to choose between protecting their citizens from dangerous AI or providing broadband service, and it just gives away big breaks to companies like Meta, that's Facebook, or Google, who I'm sure at this point in time don't really need that additional tax break. Clearly, though, the most egregious and certainly most destructive part of the bill of this reconciliation is the changes to health care. The fact that 17 million people will be uninsured and raise the cost on everyone. This is from the Congressional Budget Office. We don't need to be raising health care costs on our constituents. The CBO analysis revealed that hasty negotiated updates by Republicans discussed on behind closed doors early Saturday morning added that $130 billion in Medicaid cuts to the bill. That's a whopping $930 billion in total Medicaid cuts. That is how CBO got to this number of 17 million people. The challenge is nobody marked up a bill in committee. Nobody even had a hearing where somebody presented this information. No, this is all being changed on a daily basis, and everybody's trying to catch up. But what we're really trying to do is fight for our constituents and make sure that we know the impacts. The impacts of these 17 million people will be severe cuts felt in every corner of the United States. State governments will be the first to feel this tsunami of cuts. And unlike the federal government, they must balance their budget, so they can't borrow the money to make up for the deficit. In our state, the state of Washington, our governor and legislators have to grapple with an estimated $3 billion shortfall that this will bring to them as a result of this many people losing coverage. Yesterday, I held a virtual press conference with a group of Republican state representatives. A Republican Utah state representative who, Ray Ward, who just also happens to be a physician, warned that these cuts will amount to $1 billion budget deficit per year in his state of Utah. That budget shortfall forces his state government to make some very difficult decisions. They have to decide whether to cut reimbursements to providers, cut medical services, cut more people off the rolls, or make drastic measures like increasing everyone's taxes. Kevin Leonard and Steve Hobbs, one of them is the executive director of the Association of County Commissioners of North Carolina, and the other, Missouri representative, basically said as county government leaders and state leaders, they are worried that this bill basically is an unfunded mandate on them. Commissioner Hobbs said where they will feel it most is that services like behavioral treatment will now have to be provided through the jails instead of a medical setting. Our own Peninsula Health expert who was on the call basically said that in their region of our state, this could be as much as a 25 to 45% cut in behavioral health. So that's what happens when you cut people off of Medicaid. The amount of money, since Medicaid is $1 in $5 is a Medicaid dollar, you're going to take that much out of the system. These people do not operate on wild, profitable margins. oftentimes barely breaking even, or in behavioral health, oftentimes losing money. But I guarantee you, if instead of seeing this Medicaid population in a behavioral health setting, you think you're going to see them in the emergency room or a jail, it is going to cost us a lot more money. It's going to cost our state, our county, and the local region a lot more money. Not only will this bill diminish their Medicaid revenues, but it will also increase the uncompensated care. Some are estimating to be $42 billion. Our rural hospitals, our rural healthcare challenges will be devastating. In Washington, over 300,000 people will lose health insurance. And these are people who were easily treatable, conditions that if you treat them, chances are they will be dealt with. But now, if you don't treat them, they're going to go to the emergency room and they're going to raise costs on everyone. These families depend on this care. Last week, I spoke on the floor about one of my constituents. Britton Winterrose talked about his daughter, Leda, a 5-year-old girl who had a rare condition that when she stopped breathing, she does stop breathing in her sleep if she doesn't have oxygen. Mr. Winterrose talked about how even though he had a very expensive platinum plan, it didn't cover her costs. And just by doing this Medicaid and covering their cost, basically they have saved her life and they have enjoyed her in the many years enjoy that they have given to them. Why are we making the Winterroses sweat over whether their daughter is going to be able to keep Medicaid, about whether the whole system in their part of our state is going to be able to keep doing Medicaid? Right now, people are estimating that 5.4 million people will get pushed into medical debt because of health care and the cuts in this bill. The total amount of medical debt that Americans will owe will increase by $50 billion. So is it really worth it to take $880 billion, or whatever it is now, $930 billion out of Medicaid so that you're actually increasing the personal debt of people, making counties basically have unsustainable budgets, or having state legislatures come back in to cover our costs? As one of these commissioners said, this is nothing more than cost shifting to the states. It's irresponsible. According to the Center for American Progress, a 60-year-old couple who will be in the affordable care market today, making $85,000 a year, could see their annual premiums raise as much as $15,400. Why? Because when you have uncompensated care and you basically kick people out of Medicaid and off of the Affordable Care Act, what you're going to do is raise premiums on all of us. A low-income Medicare recipient also qualifying for Medicaid could see their costs go up as much as $8,340. So why are we doing this? And the out-of-pocket expenses now that a Medicaid person has to pay for, they could be paying as much as $1,650. You want to do that to give a tax break to Google and Facebook?
Come on, turn this thing around right now. It's your tomorrow. Right now. Come on, it's everything. Right now. It's your magic moment. Do it right here now. It means everything. You miss the beat, you lose the rhythm. Tell me, what are you waiting for? Tomorrow is too far away. Tomorrow is too far away. Do it, do it, do it. Do it, do it, do it. First time.
I understand all the complaints about Howard Stern. It wasn't about Howard Stern, okay?
Who could keep up with
Chill
every
with
year
that.
your health care costs
Absolute-
continuing to rise? And so we did the Affordable Care Act, and guess what? We did get that into the rate of inflation. I think there's more we could have done. Lots of things happened in between, but we literally got it down to 3.7%. And we did that by covering more people. The audacity of my colleagues over here to now claim that Medicaid expenses got too expensive, when in reality we made this choice to drive down these premium costs so they were only rising close to inflation, and that was our goal, and we succeeded. So what are we doing now? Well, under the GOP plan, Wakely Healthcare Institute and the Center for Budget Policy, these are numbers that come from them. The GOP plan will now go back to raising your premiums and your healthcare costs between 7 and 11% a year. A year. So we're going to go blowing way past the 5.4. We're going to go back here. And why? Because you're going to cut off millions of people from health care. You're going to increase the cost of uncompensated care. You're going to make people wait to go to emergency rooms, and then they're going to be sicker, and that's going to cost, I don't know how much it costs, but it's definitely a multiple of 5 or more. I don't know if it's, what do you know? What do you think it is, Kevin, at emergency room? 10. Okay, 10. He says 10. It's 10 times more expensive to deal with somebody at an emergency room than just get health insurance and get covered. Okay, so now we want to know, why are we raising the cost on everybody's health insurance, including these plans? Because this side of the aisle basically wants to cut a bunch of people out of a system that lowered the cost of healthcare plans overall and kept it more in the rate of inflation. Why? Why would you want to do this? So it makes no sense, and I hope our colleagues will think long and hard about that. I also think that you could still take the Google Meta tax break for multinationals and pay for $100,000 and cover the Medicaid. You could take another $100,000 from that big tax break, and you could pay for some of the energy tax credits that were so essential to combating the Chinese in what they are doing on the clean energy front. The Chinese firms are doing everything they can to invest and undercut the United States in EV and battery technology. The U.S. is responding aggressively to that. That's why we did the Inflation Reduction Act. In fact, the Inflation Reduction Act, we basically enacted more than 2,000 new clean energy industrial manufacturing jobs, more than 980 private sector jobs, and more than 3.4 million Americans claimed clean energy tax credits that improve their efficiencies. In fact, the Joint Economic Committee estimated that the typical household could save between $460 and $1,000 in annual energy costs, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. But what do we have now? We have President Trump and inflation. We have inflation because of multiple issues, consumers struggling to keep up amid higher prices, mounting debt, and fiscal uncertainty. That's what we have. And so we're reversing the very tax credits that help lower the cost, and we're going to help us be competitive against China and help us succeed as a nation in the one thing that I always think the United States is really great at, and that is innovation. I don't know if it just started with Ben Franklin or many other people along the way, but you give Americans the task and they will do the job. If you give them the education, if you give them the R&D with a university partner, they will get the job done. And so now, don't take my word for it, take Mr. Musk's word for it. The latest Senate draft bill destroys millions of jobs in America and causes immense strategic harm to our country. Utterly insane, destructive. It gives handouts to the industries of the past while severely damaging the industries of the future. Yeah, he said it best. But back to that chart, we were doing the energy because we wanted to diversify, but we also wanted to lower costs and we wanted to be competitive. Right here it says the vehicle, okay, natural gas, propane. Okay, that's why we were diversifying, because all those things are going up. So, and this bill is not going to help electricity. You're getting rid of the electricity tax credit. So again, instead of helping Meta and helping Google, you could be helping to lower the inflationary cost by making the investments in these tax credits. But Mr. President, there's more in this bill that I don't like. My colleague from Texas is proposing an AI moratorium. He literally wants to stop states from regulating the rollout of autonomous vehicles like Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who signed a letter last week to regulate how autonomous vehicles are licensed and deployed in Texas. And how do proponents of this moratorium propose to get started? By holding broadband money hostage unless you implement an AI moratorium. Well, I know what the Heritage Foundation said. The Heritage Foundation said that federal AI power grab could end state protection for kids and workers. Again, you are giving states a big, fat bill, and now you're trying to override laws that have been on the books for a long time, protecting consumers from fraud, from abuse, and from protecting, they are there to protect kids, and now you want to get rid of them. So it's no surprise that stakeholders on the right and left oppose this in the bill. They include 17 Republican governors and 40 attorney generals from both Democrats and Republicans, and other organizations ranging from the Heritage Foundation to the Center of American Progress. So anytime you can get the Center for American Progress and the Heritage Foundation on the same side of an issue, chances are you should be listening to what they have to say. But Mr. President, this bill, this letter, I would like to enter into the record from the National Association of Attorney Generals.
Without objection.
This bill would affect hundreds, I'm quoting now from this letter, quote, this bill would affect hundreds of existing and pending state laws passed and considered by both Republican and Democratic state legislatures. Some existing laws have been on the books for many years, end quote. Okay, so these are attorney generals from a variety of states who basically know the laws on their books, and they're basically saying, don't do this to us. Don't override our laws. So I'd also like to enter into the record, Mr. President, a letter from 17 Republican governors also against this provision.
Without objection.
Their letter, I'd like to read from, is really about this point I was trying to make about fighting China. I mean, I thought we were here to be competitive against them, to basically beat them in a race on innovation, just like we did with chips and science to try to move for the future. But basically their letter says, quote, we fully recognize that AI is dominant in the next industrial competition between the United States and adversaries like Communist China. States have led anti-Communist China action, banning Chinese affiliated companies from owning farmland and property critical for infrastructure and military bases. But America should not sacrifice the health and safety and prosperity of its people in this fight. We must curb AI's worst excesses while also encouraging growth. which is exactly what states have done through their creation of their own regulatory framework, end quote. So they're basically saying the states are on the front lines of helping to protect on AI. Now, Mr. President, I have no idea why the President of the United States has not protected the American people or the American military from the Chinese scams that are happening on TikTok. No, we would never let China own ABC News and put out Chinese communist propaganda on ABC News, but we let them do that on TikTok. This body and our colleagues said, no, stop that and stop the Chinese. And yet we still haven't stopped the Chinese. So now here we are in this bill cutting out the state's abilities to fight Chinese AI companies like DeepSeek or Alibaba, and they have no interest in stopping the scammers from using their AI products to harm Americans. They have none. And if you think we're going to pass something here, I'm always ready to sign up to get legislation done. But that isn't going to happen anytime soon. And so now you're telling these governors, these attorney generals, yep, I'm not even going to let you fight China because I'm going to take that tool away from you. So clearly, I don't support this part of the legislation, and I appreciate my colleague from Tennessee and her attorney general working on this very important issue. And finally, I come to the issue of spectrum. This is a very ill-conceived plan to auction off our precious spectrum. Such an auction will fundamentally compromise our defense capabilities while endangering aviation and important federal capabilities like weather forecasting and scientific research. This bill would require the FAA would require an auction of 800 megahertz of spectrum critical to our military and civilian infrastructure. It would compromise military radio frequencies and weather and other spectrum issues, most importantly, drone operations. And I know the presiding officer knows how much drones are now at the epicenter and forefront of warfare and is reshaping the battlefields across the globe. So why would we do this? Well, my colleague, Senator Cruz, is pushing for something that experts say would risk military operations. Last Congress, we got the Department of Defense and the Department of Commerce to agree that we should test bed the next generation of technology because we don't like interference. Now, I'm sure most Americans sitting at home thinking, what is she talking about? Well, if you drive in a car and you have a radio station and all of a sudden the radio station doesn't get its signal or has some interference, you know that there is an issue. The tower, not big enough, not strong enough. This is the same. This radio spectrum has been used by Department of Defense for secure purposes, very important secure purposes. Mr. President, think of the Chinese balloon and the fact that we want to detect when a Chinese balloon is flying through our airspace. We want to be able to stop people from spying on the United States of America. And yet, instead of basically saying, we are going to look at this military spectrum and make sure that it continues to be secure, my colleague is suggesting to all of us that we sell that and basically allow, I believe, for what is going to be a good amount of interference without solving this problem first. Why does that bother me? Because I think we live in a world where you're going to see more and more spectrum, more and more warfare based on satellite and communication, and the landscape is changing. So I certainly don't want our military preparedness to be affected. Air Force leaders warned that spectrum bands are crucial to this radar operations, and I'm not going to go into more about why, but I'm just saying, just like you can't have 4 radio stations basically interfering with each other, my colleagues want to allow the major telcos, mostly AT&T and Verizon, who are so hungry to sell more, whatever it is, $79.99 plans or $59.99 plans. They literally are going to give away national security just so they can sell more telephone plans. In fact, I would ask them, what have you done to clean up the last disaster that you had when the Chinese hacked you on Salt Typhoon? Now, they didn't successfully hack the telecom company in my state because they were smart enough to do all the preparatory work not to be hacked. But these guys didn't do the work, and now they're up here pushing our colleagues to say, give us more, give us more, give us more, without doing the homework required to figure out how to make sure our military is protected. But what's even more infuriating is they want the same spectrum from our airlines as well. They want to cause confusion between the spectrum of aviation and in this telecommunication. Last time the Trump administration did this, there was a major, major debate, and the White House and the Biden administration had to come in and fix it. It's all related to the altimeter on a plane. Again, the presiding officer knows this well. An altimeter helps tell the plane what altitude they're at and what to do. But if you have interference with that altimeter, as we just saw in this helicopter accident, we're pretty sure now that this accident between an American plane, regional jet, and an Air Force helicopter, there were some altimeter issues, and that caused a discrepancy and a crash. So I am not for any interference with an aviation altimeter. I'm not for it. But instead of figuring this out, working together, both commercial and defense, we're jamming into a bill the overriding of the defense interests and saying just give it to these two commercial bidders, maybe more, who then will basically just feel empowered to sell more of these telco plans. Mr. President, our competitiveness is too important. Our effectiveness is too important. Collaboration and working together to solve these problems is how the United States is going to succeed. Basically, trying to pit each other against each other in these kind of technology issues is not going to help us win. So